Hi guys, so a lot of us we've got 3D printers, myself included. Now for many years I've wanted something to go with that, and that's a laser cutter. Now as fate would have it, a company called AlgoLaser actually reached out to me and they gave me this, which is a laser cutter they call the Alpha. Now this is a 20 watt diode laser cutter, and to be honest, before I got this laser cutter, I didn't really know anything about laser cutters at all. So it's been a really steep learning curve for me. I want to pass on what I've learnt to you, review this product, and tell you some hints and tips that I've done to make this as safe as possible. Because to be honest, working with lasers, you can get burnt. Anyway, let's see what's inside the box and put this laser together. So let's start off by having a look inside the box. And we can see the kit, well, it's really well packed. And yes, it is actually a kit, we have to assemble it ourselves, but it's pretty easy. And in the box it's split into two different layers. Removing the top section of the box, we can see underneath here the other parts. And here where I've moved the parts out of the top layer, you can see how thick the actual foam is. It's really well protected. That's a really good sign, I think, so far of the quality. And if I put all of the parts onto the floor, we can see exactly what was in the box here. We assemble the X and Y axis, the front and rear assembly to make our frame. There's some safety glasses that come with it there, the toolbox. And if we quickly stop here a moment, you can see the Wi-Fi aerial on the front assembly. That allows us to connect to the laser cutter by a smartphone. But more about the Wi-Fi connectivity later on. And you can see an air pump there, that's because the laser cutter comes with air assist, which is a really good feature. We'll be looking at that later. We get given a pack of consumables, which give us something to get started using with the laser cutter. And last but not least, there's a good user manual. And looking in the quick user guide, it's really nice to see that AlgoLaser has a really big emphasis on safety. I think this is really a responsible thing to do because apparently many companies, they just don't really care about safety. In fact, Maker's Muse made a video about it about a year ago, I think. I'll put a link in the description to that. But the gist of it is some companies are very irresponsible. For instance, I'm not sure which company this advert's from, but a snippet of it, we can see a dog right next to the laser cutter and the guy using it in his front room. And when we look at the AlgoLaser safety list here, we're going to see that's absolutely crazy. So the first thing we see here in the safety guidelines is obviously not to have anything living underneath the laser. That goes without saying. But thinking about the video we just saw with the dog in the same room right next to the laser, should the laser beam be reflected off anything, well, it could actually hit anything in that room, including the man and his dog. Next safety point is people with photosensitive epilepsy. The flashing lights could trigger a seizure, so they shouldn't use this laser cutter. And next, whenever you're looking at the actual laser cutter while it's working, you should always wear safety glasses. And the Alpha from AlgoLaser, it comes with its own set of laser safety glasses. But it's a really nice touch that they actually say the wavelength that you need to protect your eyes from in case you want to buy your own safety glasses, so you can be 100% sure that you're using glasses that are going to protect your eyes. Because without using glasses, should the laser go in your eye, even if it's just refracting off something or it reflects off something, well, you could pretty much instantly blind yourself. It can burn your retina out. So it's really, really important. Please protect your eyes. We can see here there's multiple warnings about fire hazards. You've got to be really careful about when you're laser cutting that things don't catch fire. You might be laser cutting wood, cardboard, anything really, so there's always a risk of fire. One thing the company recommend here is putting a fireproof mat under the machine. That's something I'm going to be doing later. And maybe keeping a fire extinguisher nearby just in case. Because I found out it is actually pretty easy if you're careless to actually catch something on fire. I caught a piece of wood on fire by doing something a bit silly, which you'll see later on in the video. Now as well, when you're cutting or engraving things, it's going to make fumes. And you really don't want to be breathing these in. So it's important to be using it in a well ventilated area. It's recommended here that we should exhaust the fumes through a dedicated filtered exhaust. So that's something I'm going to be building before using the laser, because I really don't want to be breathing in any fumes, especially if they might be toxic. Yeah, cutting wood and things like that is not going to be too bad, but some acrylics and fake leather and things like that, when you actually cut them, they can actually give off toxic fumes. Apparently one such gas that can be given off cutting some things is something called hydrogen chloride. Well, Google it, it's really not nice if you're going to be breathing that in. Okay, so just to summarise the safety points, We need to protect both ourselves and anyone else who may come into the room, and so that includes protecting our eyes and making sure we're not having to breathe in any fumes. And lastly, just making sure we're careful about when we're cutting materials that may be able to catch fire. We don't really want to be laser cutting and just leaving the machine unattended, but at the same time, we don't really want to be looking at the laser working all of the time either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build an enclosure for mine with a fireproof base. I'm going to have an extraction system, and I'm also going to rig up a small webcam and light so I can actually keep an eye on the laser cutter from my PC, and I don't really have to look at what's going on directly. So after I've built the laser cutter, which I'm going to do next, I'll then show you what I used and how I built my enclosure, all for about $150. Okay, so normally I don't really like putting things together, but this was actually remarkably easy. I just put all of the pieces on the table, and you can see on the table as well I've actually got my laptop, because although the Alpha comes with a really clear instruction manual how to assemble, I prefer to use AlgoLaser's video tutorial showing how to put it together. Also, when building the machine, it comes with its own toolkit, so everything's included what you need to be able to put this together. So like I said earlier, it's remarkably easy to put together. You just basically bolt 4 sides together making a square, push a few little electrical socket connectors together, and connect the gantry, which is the part that the laser travels up and down on, across the frame. Next, I'm installing the powerful 22 watt laser here, but it also has another trick up its sleeve, because the laser has a 40% smaller spot size, making it a perfect square 1:1 ratio, improving both power and cutting accuracy. And if you noticed, it was really easy when I fitted the laser in. I just slid it in and then locked it into place, but we'll be looking more at that later. Up to this point the assembly had gone pretty well, but I'd made a mistake. I had the pipes on the inside of the frame instead of the outside, so I had to quickly undo a few bolts and adjust that. So once I'd done that, everything else was pretty straightforward. You have to attach a metal bar going across which attaches to the motors, which moves the gantry up and down, so that's pretty straightforward. So for me, the hardest part of assembling the machine, I think, was actually making the gantry belts. Either side there's a belt and you have to tighten them exactly the same, and the way they say you should do it is kind of twanging the belts, and both sounds on each side should sound the same, and if not you kind of tighten it up on one side and then the other till they both sound the same. But for me, I found this really difficult, but I'm not going to let you watch through me struggling to do this. It took me a little while, but eventually I got it right. So with that done, the machine's built. The silver rectangular box on the left there, that's the air assist pump. It's nice because it doesn't need a separate power supply because it plugs into the frame and it draws its power off there. At the side of the frame there we can see at the top, that's the USB port that will connect to the PC. Underneath that is where the air assist draws the power from the actual frame, and underneath that, that's where the main power supply that powers everything connects. Okay, so here's the finished product. There's everything put together. Now you can see I've put this on a piece of what's called cement board. This is totally fireproof, and what I'm going to do when I'm making my enclosure is I'm going to cut this to size so the actual frame can sit on top of it. So this is the equipment I bought to make sure I was doing my laser cutting safely. I bought a fireproof tent enclosure for laser cutters, which cost me £59. To extract the fumes from inside the tent, I bought a hydroponics pump for £35 and some 4-inch ducting, which was a further £17. Now I didn't buy a fire extinguisher, I bought this cheap £6 fire blanket instead. So I assembled the frame of the tent, and then I cut 2 pieces of 5mm ply, just slightly bigger than what the size of the frame was. Next I drilled holes around the frame and cable tied it so it couldn't move, and also made a handle at the front of cable ties, which will make it easy to move the tent around by pulling it and sliding it along. Next I cut a piece of fireboard to the same size as the frame of the Alpha. Next I needed to drill some holes in the side. This would allow me to put cables through and also to allow airflow when the extraction's on. Now talking about extraction, if you don't want to have to put a pipe out the window, then you need a friend called Luke who's a builder, and ask him to actually cut a hole through the wall for you. Okay, so thank you Luke. So guys, you can see the extraction fan hole over in the corner there, and the base of the laser enclosure is finished now. You can see there it's got the 2 pieces of wood with a gap in the middle. That means I can run cables underneath and I don't have to have them go over the actual frame itself. So with the laser cutter back on and the tent frame rebuilt, you can see what this enclosure is going to look like. I stuck a piece of upside down carpet on the bottom to make it easy to pull around on the floor. I needed to better monitor what's going on inside the enclosure when doing laser cutting. I already had a 1080p webcam lying around from a previous project, and I bought a USB ring light, and I thought if I can combine them together, stick it onto the frame, well, that's going to be the perfect solution. So I removed the base of the USB webcam and then stuck the webcam behind the actual ring light itself using a little bit of hot glue. Now I've finished making the camera and I've stuck it to the frame, and you can see the light shining down on the bed there. Now I'm testing it out here using Google Meet because that's the only way I could get the camera working on that laptop for some reason. And it's working absolutely fine. Now you'll notice there that everything's going into a USB hub. That way I can have the Alpha, the camera and the light all connected to the computer with just one cable. So that's the laser cutter enclosure all but finished. You can see on the back right hand side there's the air assist pump on its own little platform which is connected to the main platform. So all I really need to do now is put the tent on and then connect that up to the extraction system. But before doing that, I want to show you some things that are going to be easier to show you without the tent on that I think make the Alpha a really cool laser cutter. Now you probably realise, because I keep on going on about it a lot in the video, that I'm really impressed with the safety features of AlgoLaser, and we can see here the chrome looking power button, but next to that is a key which has to be in the on position in order for the laser to work. So it's a nice feature that you can actually remove the key, so you can feel confident that no one who doesn't know what they're doing is going to use it if you're not there. And the button to the right of that red button, is an emergency stop button. If you hit it, then the whole machine stops. And then to reset it, you just turn it and it pops back up. Right, so now I want to show you some really neat things about the Alpha's laser. The way you can adjust it is really cool. You just pull this little lever down and it moves up and down on like a track, and then when you push the lever back up, it locks into place. And this is cool, a removable magnetic kind of laser shroud. It's a good safety feature and it's easy just to stick on. When using a laser you have to focus it, getting the gap right between the actual laser and the material that you're cutting. On the Alpha's laser there's a little black lever that pushes down and releases this little kind of spike thing. Then what we do, we release the lever, which will then just drop the laser unit down onto the material you want to cut onto, like that. Then you just lock the laser module back into position by moving the lever up to the top position, and press the black button here and the spike goes back up, and you've got the perfect distance then between the laser module and the material you want to cut or engrave on. So I've got to say that's a pretty cool feature, making setup and preparation really easy. So anyway, the enclosure's all finished, so really I'm ready to be doing some cutting. So the tent's on the enclosure, the camera and light are all working in there, and we can see the extraction system, well, that's all connected and running as well. And the laser cutter is actually connected to one of these PCs you can see here, the one on the right hand side, which is one of my backup on RAID servers. It's running on a Windows VM, and in the VM it's using Lightburn software, which I'm using to control the laser cutter. Now one thing, there is actually an app as well, which we can put onto the phone, that allows us to control the laser and to send through files to cut and engrave from the actual phone. And this app can be found on both Android and iOS. And you can see me here using the app to control the laser. But to get the most out of any laser cutter, we really need to use proper software, and that's why I like to use Lightburn. So just what is Lightburn? Well, it's a software that's used to control laser cutters and engravers. It provides a graphical interface to design, edit and send projects to the machine. Now on Lightburn's website you can download a trial which lasts for 30 days, or you can purchase the software. We need the G-code one here, which in the UK is £51. Now if you want to buy it cheaper, if you go across to AlgoLaser's website, well, it's cheaper here at £45, and we can get a further 5% discount if we subscribe, and we'll receive an email with a code that we can use to get a discount. Now one thing I wanted to show you about the Lightburn software, I know a lot of us who use Unraid, we use VMs. Well, when I put in my key, Lightburn doesn't really like us running it in a VM. Is this the end of the world? Well, of course not, because we can actually email Lightburn and request VM activation. But I just thought I'd mention it because if you kind of run out the trial, then you buy it, well, you're going to have to wait for Lightburn to get back to you in order to activate it. Okay, so now it's time to move on and actually do some work with the algo, and I'm going to do some engraving. Now, I want to cut out this Star Wars AT-AT walker here, and I'm setting this to be black paint on white because I want the actual AT-AT to be like burnt into the wood. Now in the top right in Lightburn here under cuts and layers, you can see the image. I've set it to engrave at 6000 millimeters per second and at 100% power. Now if I turn this layer off for a moment so we can't see it, you'll see underneath that there's another layer, just a square, where I'm going to cut a line which will cut out this design from the wood. And this I've got running at 600 millimeters per minute at 100% power, so that will easily cut through the 3mm ply that I'm actually engraving this image onto. Okay, so now the alpha is just cutting around the edge of the image to make it a square. So let's take it off the bed and have a look up close what it now looks like. So yes, that looks pretty good I think. The alpha's done a really nice job. The detail is fine and the image looks really sharp. Now I tried to put some little magnets into this as you can see and accidentally drilled right through the whole piece of wood. I should have really engraved this on a thicker piece of wood, so if the camera will stay in focus I'm going to try and show you this a little bit closer up. Yeah, it really is a shame about those magnets when I drilled through the whole board, but never mind. I should really have used maybe a 10mm piece of wood like I made this little Space Invader character out of. You can see here it's cut through that 10mm ply really easily. Although to be honest I could have cut this a lot faster because you can see on the bottom of the wood I've burnt it a little bit from having it going too slow. But at least the magnets stuck in without being shown through the front. So let's go back in time and have a look at me cutting out that little Space Invader in the 10mm ply. And you can see the piece of ply on top of another scrap piece of wood I've got here. Now I did that because I wanted to draw a square so I knew exactly where to place the piece of wood so I could cut through it. But really I shouldn't have put it directly onto another piece of wood. I think that contributed to the burning that we saw earlier when I showed you the Space Invader figure. But also I think I should have cut it a little bit faster than 100mm a minute that I had it set at. But anyway, the alpha cut through that 10mm ply with ease in one pass, no problem at all. And AlgoLaser say that it will actually cut through 12mm ply in one go, and I think they're definitely right because look, it's burnt right into the wood underneath, so I think we can be sure that 12mm ply would cut in one pass as well. Now you may be wondering why this piece of 5mm 400x400 ply here on the bed of the laser cutter has these Space Invaders kind of engraved into it. Well, that's because I wanted to cut out some large Space Invaders through the 5mm hardwood ply, but I tried cutting it too fast and it didn't quite go through the wood. I was cutting at 650mm per minute and 100% power, but it didn't quite go all the way through. On some parts, like on the eyes of some of the Space Invaders, I could actually push the eyes through, they were cut through okay. So I cut it again on a new piece of wood. This time I ran it at 500mm per minute, 100% power, and as you can see here, as I picked it up everything fell out, everything was cut absolutely perfectly. You know, look at that, really clean lines. I think it's a real testament to what the AlgoLaser Alpha can actually do. Those Space Invaders have come out absolutely perfectly, no burns on either side of the wood, the air assist of the Algo really makes a difference when you're cutting. I think these Space Invaders have come out pretty much perfect. So the board that didn't cut quite through all the way I used as basically a scrap piece of wood, finding it useful to actually burn a mark onto the wood so I could work out exactly where I wanted to place things. So I'd had good success with using the laser on wood, and I wanted to actually try cutting quite a thick piece of acrylic. I wanted to try cutting a 10mm piece. Now I was hoping to cut out another Space Invader figure in the acrylic, but what I found is when I tried to do that, is because acrylic kind of melts, if I tried to cut a pattern out from the middle of a piece of acrylic, when it cooled down it would just stick back together and I couldn't push the piece actually out. So this is no fault of the laser cutter itself, it's just when trying to cut through a thick piece of acrylic, as it cools down, the part you're trying to cut out can actually bond back to the actual material. So I thought I'd try again, but this time raising the acrylic up on a couple of wooden blocks, and this time cutting a semicircle on the edge of the acrylic to minimise it being able to stick once it's cut through with the laser. Now I didn't get through in one pass, it actually took 3 passes, but as you can see here it did cut the semicircle out fine and it separated from the actual acrylic. Okay, so the next thing I tried, I probably really shouldn't have tried, but I really wanted to try and cut a circle in the middle of the acrylic and see if I could make it just push out. So my flawed plan was just to keep cutting a circle, multiple passes at a slow speed, again and again, until the actual circle fell out. Now if you remember earlier in the video, I said that I managed to catch something on fire. Well, this is when I did that. And so what happened, because I was cutting so slowly and so many passes at 100% power, the wood underneath ended up getting hot and an ember formed and it burst into flames onto the wood. So I got my fire blanket straight away and put out the fire. But I think this proves really why it's really important to make sure you keep an eye on your laser cutter at all times and have some kind of fire precaution in case something happens like it did for me. But I tell you, I was really glad that I had that webcam set up that looks inside the enclosure so I could keep an eye on it all the time when I'm working on my PC. Anyway, that was the end of my scrap piece of wood. I had to obviously throw that piece away and replace it with a fresh one. Okay, so now what I wanted to do is actually try and engrave onto some powder coated cards. So I've got a powder coated metal business card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a square and mark the wood the same size as the business card, and then I'm going to place the business card on there and engrave onto the powder coated card. So how this works is we run the laser over the card at a high speed, which burns off the powder coated paint, exposing the metal underneath, giving a really nice effect. And so here's the finished product. Looks pretty nice, I think. I really like the way we can engrave a design easily onto a metal surface. So in an upcoming video, I'm actually rebuilding my Unraid server into a new 24 bay case. And I'm going to be using the AlgoLaser Alpha to actually engrave a really nice design into the top of my case. But you're going to have to wait until that video comes out. But for now, what's my opinion on this laser cutter? Well, to be honest, I've had a whole bunch of fun with this cutter. I think it's a really great machine. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, I don't have a great deal of experience with this kind of machine, and I've been pretty much learning on the job. But from the standpoint of someone who's never used a laser cutter before, I've found this machine absolutely excellent. The build quality I think is excellent. It has a really powerful laser. I really like the way you can actually lift the module up and down easily with the locking handle, as I mentioned earlier in the video. And it does a great job at both engraving and cutting. Now if you're tempted to buy one of these and you fancy picking one up, then please see the link in the description of this video. And if you've watched this video all the way to the end, well, thank you very much for watching. Anyway guys, it's time for me to go now. But whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.